The Spin-Off Podcast Network. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
The Fold is brought to you by O-Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Nau mai, hoki mai ki a The Fold, e mihi nei, ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa. My guests this week are Victoria Young and Chamanthie Sinhalage-Fonseka from Business Desk and Baldwin Boyle Group, respectively. They are the founders, the masterminds behind Kiwi-Asians in Media and Communications, or KaiMaC for not that short, which is a group that came out of, and they tell this story in quite an affecting way, a late night conversation that got very deep very fast about their experiences as very frequently being the only woman from sort of Asian backgrounds in various rooms or groups that they'd been a part of. And while most of us leave our deep late night conversations where they began and probably for the most part belong, Chamanthie and Victoria met up a few weeks later, had coffee, and started the process of building out an organisation that would sort of wrap around, advocate for, and represent the sort of interests of Kiwi-Asians in media and communications. And as we talked about after the podcast, all of those things are fraught, you know, they chose Kiwi over New Zealander for specific reasons. Asian, it can be, that is a giant basket. It contains multitudes, and media can be as big or as small an industry as you like it. But they're sort of figuring that all out together as they go along. And also, and this was my sort of favourite stuff, is the insights around what ties this very large, very diverse group of people together in terms of experience and outlook and so on. And, you know, I think that while it's a nascent group, it's a very necessary one. It does kind of have parallels to things like the Pan-Asian Screen Collective. And what, you know, I think what they're trying to do is in a country that is, you know, closing in on 15-20% sort of Asian identifying New Zealanders within media and comms, that is just a much lower percentage, and it's not particularly scrutinised, you know, versus, you know, where representation of Māori and Pacific peoples is much more of an object of particularly kind of government and just general scrutiny. The Asian community can feel like it's not paid the same kind of attention. Everyone needs it. It's just that it doesn't happen. And I think what Chamanthie and Victoria are doing will turn that around. But yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. They go deep into the personal and what they've discovered sort of since starting this thing out there. I think that it's really going to go somewhere, and it's an important conversation. So yeah, really excited about this one. This is Victoria Young and Chamanthie Sinhalage-Fonseka on The Fold. Kia ora, Victoria and Chamanthie. Welcome to The Fold.
Thank you for having us, Duncan. Great to be here.
I wonder if you could start by just sort of taking turns telling me, you know, a bit about yourself, what your sort of day jobs are before we get into the meat of why you're here.
Yeah, I am the investigations editor at Business Desk. Obviously, we write about companies and financial news. I've been doing business journalism for about 10 years. I mostly focus on bigger projects, data projects, and investigations now. And Business Desk sits within the wider NZME Beast of New Zealand Herald, One Roof, and a few other, lots of other radio stations and things.
Cool.
Cool. And I am a senior consultant at Baldwin Boyle Group. So I've been a PR consultant all of my career. At BBG, we are one of New Zealand's oldest public relations consultancies, so we're about 40 years old. HQ is in Auckland, but we work with our teams in China, Australia, Singapore, and lots of other places, so it keeps my life really interesting.
Oh, I wondered if you could sort of give me a sense of what the genesis of Kiwi-Asians in media and communications is.
Yeah, I'll start. Well, it's started back in February. Chamanthie had a party. We did things that you do at parties. Near the very end of the night, we were locked in quite a deep conversation about life and our professions and our careers and lots of other stuff. But I guess what's relevant for this podcast is we talked about being Asian and being in our fields and what's that like. I mean, about being Asian, also about being female and that sort of thing. But, we sort of... I don't remember a lot of the conversation, actually. I know that we had quite a deep conversation about it.
And it was the first time we'd actually properly met. It was a very strange scenario because, you meet someone for the first time properly in your house and you get right into it at about 1 a.m, being like, wow, you're another Kiwi-Asian person and we have shared experiences. And that was really novel for both of us, I think, in our careers.
Yeah, especially, I know Chamanthie from Twitter and who she is and all that sort of thing. So it's like we knew each other, we did it and we just clicked and we talked about all these things. And I what it was like when I graduated from law school. My dad wouldn't come to my admission because I'd already decided to be a journalist. All these things I guess we can unpack, about what it's like being Asian and my parents would call it a creative field, journalism. And so that's where we bonded and we made other remarks. There were other people at that party that we were talking about it too, and that's kind of where the thing began.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because, when we think about being Kiwi-Asian in our industries, it's not just sort of which part of the world did your, parents or grandparents or whoever comes from. It's like Vic is third generation Kiwi, whereas I moved to New Zealand when I was 10. So we have very different experiences of being Kiwi-Asian. And yet when she was like, I went to law school before I decided what I really wanted to do because my parents wanted me to be a lawyer, I have the same experience. I went to law school and then as I graduated, I chose the court of public opinion over a courtroom. And then my husband's exactly the same. He got into medical school before he went to law school, and then we started just sort of pulling out these examples and we found these common threads. And all of those common threads led to there are people who are Kiwi-Asian who genuinely want to be in our industries, but we take these massive detours to get there. And we started to sort of unpack, is it a deficit within what our industries are doing to bring them in? Or is it kind of where we come from in terms of our families and culture and things? And this is all, 1 a.m. conversation. It got deep.
It did get deep. It did.
But it's there's so much in what you're just saying, and I think that sense of the family expectations and the extent to which that kind of informs and sort of dictates or presses on your career and that kind of relationship to the media. Is that the kind of thing that you feel like is just not particularly well understood, but is actually a huge and present part of the reality for sort of Pan-Asian communities in New Zealand? Yeah,
and I think you're right in that it's not well understood, and it's not really well understood by us as well. So if you look at the stats, Asians in New Zealand, we're supposed to be hitting about, and when we say Asian, sorry, I should stop there, because the term Asian itself has different connotations for different people. So if I can just take a minute to kind of take you through our definition of... Please do. We decided at the outset to take a really broad definition geographically, which means from the Middle East to the Pacific Ocean and from the top of Russia to the Indian Ocean. If you are like if you have some heritage relating to people in that area, like, and you choose to kind of almost self-identify in that way, like we're happy with that, because I think that in New Zealand, when you say Asian, often they think of East Asians, whereas in the UK they think of South Asians. So we sort of went, look, let's just make it really broad, and people can self-identify, which also means if you are, if you have a great-great-great-grandfather who was Japanese, but you present as Pākehā, but we think that's still fine because there are intergenerational sort of values and things that do get passed down. So that's sort of we've taken a broad kind of definition. And then the question after that is, well, then what makes all of your experiences common? Because there's a lot of diversity in that,
an enormous
Huge.
basket.
It's huge. Yeah. And so we did two things. One is that we decided it shouldn't just be the me and Vic show. We actually decided to, after that conversation, we couldn't stop thinking about this. So we decided to actually go out and talk to a handful of Kiwi-Asian professionals in our industries to find out what their experiences were. And it was really interesting because we were starting to see common themes coming through despite the broad geography. And so there are these like sort of common cultural elements there. And a lot of those were around cultural expectations. If you were from migrant backgrounds, there was a real push towards the sciences. And then when I was growing up in central Auckland, law was considered, at least in the double grammar zone, law was still considered to be a bit of a airy-fairy liberal thing. If you were a serious person, you went into medicine, and if you couldn't get into medicine, you did engineering or at least accounting, or teaching was another like known profession. So if we bring it back to the number of Asians in New Zealand, we're due to hit about 1 million in terms of population, but somewhere between 2024 and 2028, I believe. And then you look at, but what about representation in our industries? And I think for media, as of 2022, less than 5% of members of the media were some kind of Asian. And then for public relations, so Prinz released some figures for 2022, it was really grim. In 2018, roughly 15% of PR people surveyed identified as Asian. 2022 was around sort of the 5 to 8% mark. So we're the only group that's gone backwards. And you start to go, as a population, we're growing. But in terms of representation, and like when we say news making and news shaping industries, because there's an access to democracy thing there. If you can, through journalism and communications, there's access to, getting your point across. There's, fourth estate and representation the same way. You need lawyers representing you in terms of like where the way that the justice system evolves. And you start to go, actually, there's too few of us being represented, even though the population's growing.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, right? Because there's a lot to this, including, Victoria, I'm curious about your view on this, the extent to which there's a representation in terms of actually, people creating the stories, editing the stories, commissioning, all that kind of thing. There's also the other side of it in terms of how communities are covered, whether news and media feels like it is for and about them and on what terms it's conducted. How have you sort of reflected on or experienced that in your career?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I have to say, I've been a business journalist for a long time, and I started my career at the NBR. So that's not really a starting point for diversity, to be fair. I've spent a lot of time in conference rooms or in court or, wherever with a lot of old white men, basically. And it's not something that I had, it's something I've always known but not really thought about. And even to the point where I've had colleagues in previous jobs say, oh yeah, but you're not really Chinese, but that it's not well-meaning.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, I'm still Chinese, like I am. But I think you're right. There is that element about I I have not reported on Chinese communities, for example. And, it's interesting that there was a time and a hunger for this because, the RNZ has just started its Asia journalism unit, right? And, I've talked to Jeremy Rees about actually Jeremy has come out to talk to us about what that should be. And, he's got other pipeline projects going on with that, but he could probably talk about that. For me, it's like, okay, well, I'm not a journalist because I am Asian. Being Asian doesn't give me an advantage in business journalism. I don't really report on, it's not like all the Chinese CEOs. I mean, where are they anyway? I come and talk to me or anything like that. What does it really mean? But I think the fact that I just exist, it's kind of, actually Chamanthie sort of convinced me that was enough, and that I'm semi-management, so that I could have a little bit of say. But, for me, I never think, what would a Chinese person report this differently or how that works. I just think let's all talk to each other about how that works and who we are. And we do have, like one of the conversations we had early on when we were sort of testing this idea is people were like, we need a forum so, when something is going on in an Asian country and we don't understand it or we're getting approaches from our colleagues in our newsroom, we don't know how to deal with it, we can talk to each other at least about how we are dealing with it and how we are helping people that aren't Asian understand our points of view in a chill and responsible way, I guess,
Yeah, I mean, and that does sort of get to where it ends up being this sort of extra load that can be placed on you to kind of both do your job and then also, I mean, and you've in some ways created this for yourself by founding this organisation, is that because this is just going to be extra work. But it must be that late night conversation, for it to have brought you here and to kind of create this, it must feel like there is something kind of quite substantial that you've hit upon. When you have taken it out and kind of workshopped it with people, particularly members of this kind of this large community, how have people responded to it? What are some of the kind of stories that sort of speak to us, how important it is?
Well, definitely from the journalists I spoke to, especially for the really, really senior ones, they've never had this. They were like, what are you guys going to do? How is it going to work? But people just like to talk about what it's like. You just have that similarity or thing about you and you guys want to, we just want to talk about it differently. I mean, how did you feel in that first event, Chamanthie, when everyone was in that room and like you sort of introduced each other to each other, but you didn't have to, and it was a different vibe than I've
never had an experience like that before. The way that I try to contextualize it to people that have a lot of questions, and it's great that people have questions, is imagine having gone through your career, never seeing another person like you in a team. So this year, for the first time ever in my career, so I'm in my mid-30s now, I have a Kiwi-Asian colleague, and I've worked in Auckland, Wellington, and the Waikato, and it actually hadn't hit me that I had never actually had another Kiwi-Asian colleague before. It was just kind of a norm, and I didn't expect the experience of having her in my team to be more profound than I have a talented new colleague. But actually it is. And what's great, I think, and I think you mentioned sort of how this all fits in with our work, is two things. One is that she was hired not because of some quota or anything like that, but she was genuinely good. She's a junior. She's genuinely good. And I'm pleased that my firm was able to recognize that. But the second thing is that with both Vic's bosses and my bosses, they've really come to the party with this project. So they allow us work time to work on this if we want to. They agreed to be our founding partners because there's seeding that needs to be done in the early stages, but at the same time they're not precious about, because you can imagine, given it's media and public relations, and because anything related to diversity is so, of the moment, you can imagine them wanting to be exclusive on this, but they're letting us really run with we want to expand this out so that other media organizations and other public relations organizations can actually buy in and support and become members. So we've been really pleased in the way that our work's dealt with that. And I also think that to what Vic was saying around kind of how did I feel about that first event, it was phenomenal. We were in a room of 40 people, quite a contingent from the spin-off as well. I think you guys might have had one of the biggest groups there. It was really wild to be we're having these very normal everyday conversations, but everyone comes from the same or similar context. And you had people like Gilbert Wong, who are just absolute veterans of the industry, both journalism and public relations. And then you had people that were just coming out of AUT journalism school, and that cross-pollination and sharing stories. And it was just a really interesting experience. And I think, Duncan, also just one more thing in terms of how we found going around and workshopping the idea, after we had our chat at the start of the year, we couldn't stop thinking about it for a few weeks. We caught up for coffee. We went, right, we need to get a bit of a brains trust so we're not just in a little bubble by ourselves. So we tapped Sam Sachdeva at Newsroom, Mandy T at Renews, and Branavan Yanalingam, who is both a commentator and a writer. And we went down to Wellington and we said to them, "Are we crazy? Are we?" And they went, "No, we didn't." To varying degrees, it was a yes, there's something there. Yes, we'll help you explore it. And then we just kept broadening that brains trust out. And at our first event, we did a survey, which yielded some really, really interesting results. But yeah, so I think all in all, this is sort of tracking in the direction of the key message that we've gotten from everyone is we want more. We don't know what more looks like. So can you please help us fashion that out? But whatever is happening here in terms of this kaupapa, we want more of it.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
I mean, it does feel like it's a bit of an emergent moment for obviously identities more broadly, but particularly I think Asian New Zealanders sort of starting to kind of look for opportunities to kind of speak in different contexts within media. I'm thinking obviously the RNZ's new initiative, but also the Pan-Asian Screen Collective, which we've had a bit to do with, and who are a bit of a model in terms of how they've liaised with different facets of the industry. In terms of how, because I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could take this. What are the sort of, if you're for media organisations or for practitioners, how would you like to be engaged with right now?
Well, I guess we have a couple of sort of stated goals, I guess, which sort of outline what we want to be, and I guess which would help show where we want to engage. So the first one is to provide that network that we talked about, whether it's online or in just having people in the same space, that sort of thing. Promoting diversity to create visibility of us. Foster talent, that's probably a big one. And I mean, you could probably go a lot longer on this, on just how important that pipeline is to us. Having people visible in the media and having more specific things like scholarships or other ways in we think might be important. And it comes back to this pathways issue that we see, where that a lot of talented people come into journalism or comms in a different route. So how do you find them before they go to law school, or how do you find them after they go to law school? I don't know.
Law school's going to be in there somewhere.
Yeah, like we don't want Kiwi-Asian people to accidentally turn up in our industries. I mean, we're grateful for the ones that did, but it would be really good if we could be more deliberate about that. One of the kind of key moments where it was sort of a light bulb moment for the talent pipeline was actually it was because of the spin-off. A few years ago, I did a piece on being a Kiwi-Asian woman in these industries and got a phone call from a teacher at Ormiston College, and I didn't know the school existed. And she and the whole experience was really wild because she said, "Oh, well, we read your piece in class and she said, you should come in and spend the day with these sixth formers." And so this teacher, this English teacher, she's in her 20s. She's Kiwi Sri Lankan. And then the most surprising thing about that class was about 90% of them were Kiwi-Asian. I had never been in a mainstream New Zealand school where the overwhelming majority were Kiwi-Asian because it's out in Flatbush where there are a lot of...
especially in Newtown, right?
Yeah. And so she said, look, your piece was one of the ones that we kind of looked at as a class because she runs a bit of what she calls like a dead poet society where she tries to get Kiwi-Asian writers, journalists, so on to come in and spend the day with the students. And so I wasn't sure what I was in for, but she'd gotten them to all write personal essays. She wanted me to spend the day with around 60 students, so 2 classes, looking through their personal essays and just sort of helping them with them. I didn't expect to get to be as moved as I was. I was reading through these personal essays, and all of them in one way or another was about the experience of being Kiwi-Asian in New Zealand. So you had sort of this young Indian woman coming out to her parents. And these were things when I was going to school, you didn't have to be Kiwi-Asian. Nobody really was able to have those conversations with their parents, let alone Kiwi Indians, right? Mm-hmm. And so we had this experience. And then I said to her, well, why don't, are these students considering careers in journalism or communications or something to do with writing? And she said, well, no, because for a lot of them, they're talented storytellers, talented writers, talented thinkers, but they'll all try to go for medical school or whatever. And it was this moment where I thought, well, how can our industries now connect with these young people? Because part of the reasons why they wouldn't consider our industries is because the myths around them are that they're low paid, which doesn't have to be the case, depends on where you land, that it's harder if you're Kiwi-Asian because there's just too many unknown variables versus the science where things are seen as a bit more definite. And also they've just, and to Vic's point about a critical mass and visibility, there just aren't that many people who are Kiwi-Asian who are visible in these industries to then bring that back to schools and communities. And so that was sort of a light bulb moment that fed into this and really kind of hones our purpose. So I think that'll be one of the first things that we kind of try to get off the ground in terms of a piece of work from the organisation.
I mean, it's funny when you mention that because I just earlier this week was looking at the careers I think it's .govt.nz, the government's kind of careers site. And if you go to the journalism page, it has an arrow saying poor, there's low demand for journalism and it's low paid. And you're that's sort of, and it's always irked me that there's this sort of official advice avoid. And you're it's a challenged industry. There's actually not low demand for journalism. There's a challenged economic model. Those are 2 different things. But some of this, on some level, is a bit of a government relations job, right? It is about, interventions like the one that you made in essentially a sort of created by the will and the mind of one teacher that actually can be a bit more systemic and kind of hopefully change some of that culture or provide a counterweight to some of that cultural bias that opens them to these professions that you seem to both have got so much from. Is that part of it, that you want to speak to the relevant parts of government and engage with them?
Yeah, anyone that's a decision maker along that continuum. So government would definitely be part of it. Teachers are a huge part of it. Parents, families. I mean, like Vic mentioned her dad and, choosing not to come to her admission. My parents still don't know what I do for a living. They're just it's hard to explain what public relations is. And then with my husband, who's a journalist, I think it's easier for them to understand because they can see his name in print or wherever. And they've gone through a process of going from, oh my goodness, you're not going to go on your set path, what we came to this country for, all of that baggage, to, oh, I can see how you're making a really good life of this. And actually, both my parents and his parents are they subscribe to whichever publication he's writing for at the moment. Business, they both went and got business desk subscriptions and all of that kind of stuff. And that's a mark of sort of pride. And so that sort of starts to say, well, actually, how can we tap into that with some of these parents much earlier? And so government definitely part of it, and I think for the industry as a whole, but certainly for the Kiwi-Asian part of it, say it's employers, parents, teachers are probably the main ecosystem.
Because there are some journalistic or communications roles, like you said, like your Telepa's role is just much more prominent because there's a picture of him in a byline, whereas the work of a skilled public relations practitioner is often by the nature less visible. Is it actually about just kind of getting these stories together? And, I guess that's where your role in communications can be quite useful to the whole project in some respects. So thinking again about whether it's media organisations, communications departments within larger organisations, as I know from this podcast, when the word media is elastic and quite huge, there's entertainment industry, which is right next to some definitions of media. What do you like in terms of how they should engage with you? What's the best thing for them to do as organisations to try and start to make the Pan-Asian representation within their organisations less accidental and more deliberate? Yeah,
I think there's sort of a structured way to interact with us and then a more ad hoc way, and I think those both go side by side. So later this year we'll be launching sort of formal membership and things like that. And then we've got a landing page up, we've got a LinkedIn page, LinkedIn group, obviously official email address, all of that kind of stuff. And what we're seeing is people are just getting in touch with questions and thoughts, and that kind of those ad hoc things that are coming through are actually just as kind of important, because I think one of the mistakes people might make is assuming that we're going to move straight to some kind of formal membership model where it's sort of top down. You get your monthly newsletter with updates on how members of the Kiwi-Asian community are going. And to some extent, there probably will be that in the future. But at the moment, the way that you reached out, the way that Jeremy Rees from RNZ reached out, tell them, they're going, hey, can we be part of this conversation? And we're going, okay, well, whatever you need in terms of your organization or whatever you've got going, we'd like to try and be part of that. And what we're doing in terms of, we don't call them members yet, but we've got a database of 100 professionals from around the country. And the database was created by people recommending more people. And we're at the moment, we're seeing two key markers of success. One is that through the event, and we've got another one coming up in Wellington next month, but through the event, the LinkedIn page, et cetera, people are meeting people, and that's turning into real opportunities. So we had an example of, at our event, there was a senior journalist who met a journalism student of Chinese origin. And because they met, the student kept in touch with the journalist and went on to offer a tip, which then turned into a really interesting news story concerning the Chinese, like a Chinese business, which Western journalists may not have as easily stumbled on. So you can see for that media organization itself, if you want to talk about cold hard, like ROI, there's a real, it's not just diversity for diversity's sake. Those kind of opportunities to meet and connect are actually creating more opportunities. So yeah, to an extent, we're creating the formal track. But on the other hand, it's like, how can we get as much cross-pollination going as possible? So at the moment, we just want people to get in touch with us in any way, and we just follow those opportunities through and try to bring them back to those 4 aims that Vic mentioned.
Yeah, so if your listeners are wondering what's the best way to support us, it is to let their people know about us so that we can create that mass, because we want to be, and we're striving to be, reasonably grassrootsy, I guess. You know, we
don't have a logo yet.
Yeah, we don't have a logo yet. Yeah, we don't. We don't. And it's funny because at first I was like, oh no, we need to do this and this and this. And Chamanthie was like, no, brains trust, and all this sort of stuff. It is this slow journey where we figure ourselves out and figure out what our membership or what will become our membership wants to do. And there's a hunger for it, but there's also, we want to be careful and deliberate, so there's no real rush. I mean, people want to sponsor us, you know, stuff like that.
Which is great.
But we're going to be so careful, you know.
Yeah. I think we look a lot to the Kiwi-Asian lawyers, funnily enough, as kind of a model, because as I said, when I was growing up, it was not really a thing, and the only Kiwi-Asian lawyer you ever really heard of was Mei Chen. And so I grew up seeing her on television and things, and then you look at the Kiwi-Asian legal network and the work that they've done, and currently 1 out of every 9 lawyers in New Zealand identifies as Kiwi-Asian, which is phenomenal. And then you have the likes of people like Mindy Chen Wishart, who has just finished up as the Dean of Law at Oxford, and she is a Kiwi-Asian. And you kind of go, okay, so when you think about that visibility, the lawyers are doing it really well. And we look to law not just because we started life training to be lawyers, but because that kind of connection between the court of public opinion and the court of law, in terms of what we do comes in many ways into that representation arena. And we think that if you've got Kiwi-Asians sort of being represented, whether it's on Kiwi-Asian issues or not, just the fact that they're there in that arena, there should be a parallel in what we do. And so we look to them quite a bit as a guide of, I guess, or just as a bit of a blueprint to loosely follow.
There's actually 2 Kiwi-Asian legal networks that compete against each other.
That's how you know it's Kiwi-Asian.
But also, that's how evolved they are.
So in terms of a success marker, it'll be when you've got a rival faction across town denouncing you. Hey, honestly, it's such a great mission, and I do think, even though you don't have a logo, you're really onto something in terms of the way you're going about it, and I really appreciate both of you coming up onto the fold.
Cool, thank you for having us.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
K-pop to me means more than just listening to music. It's learning to be myself.
The spin-off's new documentary, K-Pollies, follows 3 Pacific youth obsessed with K-pop. In a one-off documentary, see what they've found in Korean pop culture and how they bridge it with their own.
When you start dressing, looking different, everyone side-eyes you. But in K-pop, they're just no, celebrate yourself.
Watch K-Pollies today at thespinoff.co.nz/videos. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.